to Couch Potato Diary, looking at the greatest Oakland, Los Angeles, Las Vegas Raiders of all time. My name is Peter Klein. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is also a soft launch for the Raiders podcast I will be doing this fall as we get ready for the start of the NFL season, called Let's Raid, which is absolutely making fun of the Russell Wilson Bronco Nation, Let's Ride thing. So it would be a bit ironic if the Raiders then signed Russell Wilson to a contract, but I will deal with that irony when we get there. Either way, if we get there. Either way, today we are focusing on the greatest Raiders of all time. Coming in at number 10. Not necessarily someone who you first associate with the Raiders, but as I was a young lad coming up in the football world playing Tecmo Super Bowl, this was a guy who was on an unbeatable team, and then he came to my team, and then they made it to the Super Bowl. Does he have the greatest Raider run of all time? Maybe, maybe not. Well, definitely not. But he is one of the greatest football players to ever play, and he was on the Raiders, and they almost won a championship. I had to put Jerry Rice on this list. I know, it's more San Francisco than this, but he comes over to the Raiders. It is, again, a team that is all of a sudden like just that much more competitive with him around. And so and again, I was 12 and he was really good in the video game. And then look at that, he's on my team. So I had to love him. So there will always be a soft spot in my heart for the Jerry Rice time with the Oakland Raiders. Okay, coming in at number 9, maybe someone who is a bit more associated with the Oakland Raiders, and that is Jack Tatum. 3-time All-Pro, once on the second team. And there are so many guys on this list that are just Raiders. You know, I know I've said that all week with, this was a guy who embodied the Flames. This was a guy who embodied the Riders. Well, this was a guy, along with basically everyone else on this list, who embodied what it meant to be an Oakland Raider at that time. Coming in at number 8, ditto for this guy. It is Howie Long. He was a game wrecker on the defensive line in the league for about 12 years and just an absolute stud basically the whole way. An unbeatable force, a game changer with so many big personalities on that team. He was just a big man who was going out there taking care of business. You go back and you watch any of the film or anything like that, and it does not take long for Howie Long to stand out. He was such a huge part of the game-wrecking ability of some of the more successful Raiders teams that we have had. Coming in at number 7, it is Jim Plunkett. He embodies what it means to be a Raider in a different way. The Raiders for so long really embraced the island of the misfit toys. And no one fit that more than Jim Plunkett, who came in with a lot of hype, didn't work, came to the Raiders as a reserve, worked his way as a starter, and won Super Bowl MVP. That is the Raider journey. And it's something they tried to duplicate a few times. Didn't always work, but he was absolutely that type of a guy who Al Davis looked at and was like, you know what? We can turn him. He's a Raider. He's going to fit here, and we're going to get something out of him, and he's going to lead us to special things. Coming in at 6, it is Marcus Allen. Not always the best relationship with the organization, but my guy ran for over 8,000 yards as a Raider. One of the more talented running backs in the history of the sport. And when you talk about how smash mouth and rugged the Raiders were, I don't think you can talk about the Raiders' success without the game-wrecking ability and game-breaking ability of Marcus Allen on the defensive side, on the offensive side of the football. His speed, he is a running back who would fit in with today's athlete, with today's running back, and you wouldn't even notice. And the Raiders have had a couple of those, right? Like with him and Bo Jackson. Those are guys who absolutely, any era, that guy's going to fit, he's going to work. And that is what Marcus Allen did with the Oakland Raiders. He was such an important part of what they did as a franchise and how they were able to grow as a franchise. There is, I don't know if there is another team in sports I'm sure every fan base thinks this, right? Like, there is some of the, sorry, there is the equivalent of me going on a Kansas City Royals podcast, and you know what? This guy embodied what it meant to be a Kansas City goddamn Royal. But I really do feel like there is no team that embodies its identity, or embodied its identity more than the Oakland Raiders. And yes, they have certainly gotten away from that. And there are times where they tried to lean into it maybe a little bit too much, and it ended up, biting them. And that's why we've had not the most successful run over the last little while, but things are starting to turn around. And I do think that with Antonio Pierce here, I don't think you're ever going to get like the violent, like, oh, I have a club on my arm, let's use it. Like, I don't think you're going to get that way with the Raiders ever again. But I do think that Antonio Pierce is going to do a good job of kind of balancing the old Raider way and just walking that line in what it means to do that in 2024. Because there was a long time where the Raiders would play 1980 style in 2006, and it ended up with a lot of penalties. It ended up just being, like, instead of being swagger and all of that, it was just undisciplined and dumb. I think Antonio Pierce is going to bring this team back into 2024, but take motivation from these teams that we are talking about today, from these players that we are talking about today, and really help grow this franchise and take it to another level. That is the respect that I have for Antonio Pierce and the job that I think he's going to be able to do. All right, into our top five. At 5, it is Jim Otto. 210 starts, and maybe more than any other player on this list embodied what it meant to be an Oakland Raider. When you look at the Raiders of those times and the championship winning teams and the teams that were just absolutely wrecking teams all over the place, it all starts with that foundation on the offensive line and how they were able to, like, obviously the defense was out there just kicking the shit out of teams, but the offensive line and the foundation they were able to set, I think, was really what allowed the Raiders to then branch out to be that team that became so feared in their heyday. And Jim Otto was a gigantic piece of that. Coming in at number 4, it's Kenny Stabler. He was the first Super Bowl quarterback for the Raiders franchise and was really, well, obviously, like, he was the quarterback, but a key piece of kind of shifting that dynamic for the Raiders and getting this team to the promised land. In at number 3, these two guys are kind of tied together. And honestly, I probably could have put Otto there. But coming in at 3 and 2, it is Art Shell and Gene Upshaw. Both guys, again, that foundation we talked about on the offensive line, the Raiders had it with those guys, and they had it, like, all the way. And they were the tone setters on the team. They were leaders on the team. They were guys who were just going to go out there and, all right, the defense is going to beat you up, but by the way, we're going to beat your defense up as well, and we're going to wear you down, and we're eventually going to be able to break through and win this football game. That is the tone that this offensive line set with the Oakland, Vegas, Los Angeles Raiders. And at number 1, I have Tim Brown. The all-time receptions leader for the Raiders, was in Oakland forever and was just such a steady force on those Raider teams for so long, through some good and some very bad as well. But he was always so reliable out there and was a Raider for so long and just had that battle and that compete that embodied what it meant to be a Raider. And I haven't done this for all of the ones so far. There is only one coach that can be the coach of the all-time team. That has to be John Madden, right? Like, there isn't even a second. Like, the Mount Rushmore of Raider coaches, with all due respect to the other championship winning coaches, but the Mount Rushmore of Raider coaches is John Madden, John Madden, John Madden, John Madden. And again, all due respect to the Hall of Fame coaches who came after him. But he was so important to, and honestly, like, the Raiders important to him as well, right? Like, if he doesn't finally get that championship win and that moment where he's hoisted up on everyone's shoulders, I don't know, like, his personality was big enough, he was smart enough, he was intelligent enough, he probably would have broken through anyway, but I don't know if he gets the start and kind of gets the leeway to be himself if he doesn't have that big moment. And the Raiders, I think, are looked upon very differently if there is no John Madden leading that team in that way. And like we talked about before, being able to find that line was significantly more blurry in the 70s and the 80s. And John Madden let his guys really walk that tightrope and do that very effectively. And so, as you all know, he passed away a couple of years ago around the holidays. But just an icon, a legend, and someone who, like, deserves to be among the all-time greats and is just genuinely one of the most important football people in the history of the sport. And honestly, like, there are people synonymous with growing their sports. Like, I think the number one, like Jordan, Tiger Woods, there are players who have helped grow the brand of the NFL, but I don't know if a person has done more to grow the sport of football, and very few have done more to grow their own personal sport ever than John Madden with the Oakland, Los Angeles, Las Vegas Raiders. But like, look, like there are so many guys who were left off this list that could absolutely and should absolutely be on here. But like I don't want to start naming them because then I'm gonna miss some. And this was such a difficult top 10 to put together because there's just so many guys that were true to the foundation of what it meant to be a Oakland Raider. And with the autumn wind, like you can just if I was allowed to use videos on this or music, the autumn wind would just be all the way through this whole thing. It's a glory area that I personally was not able to live through, obviously. And now being a Raider fan for the last little while has been extremely difficult. And that's why, like, you look back on the, whether it's the old games or you go back and watch the documentaries, like the America's games on these teams are the most entertaining because all those guys are still fucking insane. And so you love it. And so you want to get back to that. And obviously they're never going to be that type of a team again because no one could be that type of a team again. But I do really believe that Antonio Pierce will be able to bring that kind of attitude and modernize it to make it work in today's climate and today's NFL. And so hopefully when we do these lists again years from now, there are more current Raiders that are on it than, like, who's the most recent? Tim Brown. So hopefully we don't go another like 20-year stretch without a dude making this team. Although I'm sure there are some that could, right? Like, no, can't think of any. So that's the show. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We're going to be doing Let's Raid as we get closer to the year. There'll probably be a few more of these spots here and there, like draft time, that sort of a thing, but it'll really get going in the NFL season. So, thank you guys so much for tuning in throughout Mexico week, as with the other ones. And by the way, if you're just tuning into this one, I did do 4 others this week: Blue Jays, Flames, Raptors, Saskatchewan Roughriders. All of those right now available on this channel. Go check it out. Any disagreements here, leave them in the comments below if you are watching on YouTube. Also, make sure you like and subscribe. If you're listening in podcast form, thank you. Subscribe, leave a review, and then get at me on social media. Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, I'm at Primetime Klein. Twitch.tv/PrimetimePK. Hoping to do some Raider stuff on Madden in the offseason to kind of bridge that gap for football for us a little bit. So, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Back to your regularly scheduled programming next week here on Couch Potato Diary and the Couch Potato Diary Sports Network. Thank you guys so much. Have a great rest of your day.